Hello, this is The Context live from Washington with me, Christian Fraser, and Sumi Somaskanda.
President Trump made it very clear, everything we do, and this is true in government, but especially at the Department of State, everything we do must be justified by the answer to one of three questions. Does it make us stronger? Does it make us safer? And does it make us more prosperous? If it doesn't do one of those three things, we will not do it.
And I know there's going to be people being deported, but we've been dumped on by these countries. We know it, and they know it. And this town is corrupt as it can be, and until we clean house and get things going.
The World Health Organization regrets the announcement that the United States of America intends to withdraw from the organization. WHO plays a crucial role in protecting the health and security of the world's people, including Americans.
Joining us on the panel tonight, Republican Abel Maldonado, former Lieutenant Governor of California, and the Democrat strategist Joel Rubin, who served in the State Department in the Obama administration.
Well, a very good evening. After the blitz of executive orders Donald Trump issued from the Oval Office last night, now the heavy lifting begins to get a lot of that policy through Congress. The president, seen here at a prayer service earlier today, is expected to meet in the next hour with the House Speaker Mike Johnson and the new Senate leader John Thune. And let's be clear, it is one thing signing bits of paper for the cameras, getting near unanimity from the wafer-thin majority Republicans have in the House, another challenge altogether.
Indeed so. They are hoping to hammer out the details here on how exactly they're expected to accomplish this ambitious legislative agenda. Shock and awe on Monday. But now the question is, how do you pay for all of that? And in what order? Donald Trump is in favor of one big, beautiful bill that would include all his spending plans for the border, for his tax cuts, for the debt ceiling, and much, much more. All right, let's bring our correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, who's been following Donald Trump's first full day in office. Gary, good to see you. Did we get a sense from Donald Trump on just how they plan to pursue that agenda?
Well, I mean, there are various different kinds of agendas here. Some of the stuff, of course, he announced is intentional. I want to do this. Some of this stuff he can do absolutely, like withdrawing from the WHO we heard there in the Paris Climate Agreement. And then some of the stuff, like we were expecting in the next hour, and it's some sort of infrastructure announcement. I mean, bear in mind that became a running joke in the first Trump administration, Infrastructure Week. It never happened. They never got a bill. Joe Biden did pass a bill through Congress, $1 trillion worth of infrastructure spending, a lot of bridges and roads and tunnels and all that kind of thing. But they haven't spent all the money that was earmarked for that. So there's money in the pot that they could start using straight away, redirecting to the kinds of things they want to use. So they may be able to do some of that pretty quickly. But in terms of getting a massive bill through that includes tax cuts, that includes border stuff, doing that sort of, omnibus type bill, that is something that Republicans in the House are very, very wary of. They have an incredibly narrow majority, fewer than the fingers on one hand in the House. And so any kind of bill that particularly that would increase the deficit, which still some Republicans are really worried about.
And Gary, as you're speaking, we're looking at some pictures at the State Department there where the newly sworn in Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, well, he delivered remarks a little bit earlier in the day to those who work at the State Department. What do you think of what he had to say, and whether you think his vision of America's role in the world aligns with Donald Trump?
Well, it's very much the America First policy. I think he didn't say that, but this thing, does it make us stronger? Does it make us more prosperous? Does it make us safer? That doesn't include things like foreign aid spending, for example. And we know there's now a moratorium on foreign aid spending for a period of time while they look at it all. It doesn't include things like that soft power and things like that they also rely on. So that funding of some of those other programs in the global south, people will be very worried about that. And you add into that the sort of moral compass that the Republican Party under Donald Trump comes from, which is very, very concerned about funding kinds of programs around the world, that might involve birth control, for example. I think there's going to be a lot of NGOs that are going to be very worried about where the money's going to come from for those sorts of things in the future.
Gary, thank you very much for that. Abel, follow the money. That's what they say, isn't it? And that's what's going on here, because House Speaker Mike Johnson knows he has that slender majority. He knows that if he puts everything together, lumps it all together in one bill, let's have reform of immigration in there, let's get tax cuts in there, we'll amend the debt ceiling. He's daring those on the right of his party to say no.
I think so, and I think it is a decision that Speaker Johnson's going to have to make. I think we've already heard President Trump say that he wants one beautiful big bill. Let's not forget, the people of America gave President Trump a mandate. They gave him the Senate, they gave him the Congress, and Republicans better come together because it is their job to work with President Trump. It's his agenda for America first, and move it forward. This notion of I need a lifeboat, that's not going to happen here. President Trump will be on the phone immediately, making sure he gets all the votes.
Well, that's the point. I wonder, Joel, if he might play a bit of the role that Nancy Pelosi played, of course, in corralling her conference in Congress. He's the one who ultimately is going to decide, and I can't imagine that you'd have a whole lot of defectors among the Republican members of Congress who would dare to stray from what Donald Trump wants.
Well, Sumi, he can't afford to lose more than one because right now the House, it's 218 to 215. That means basically one House Republican can defect and still they would still be able to have a majority. And this goes to the question, what's in this package? And they need to pass what's called a reconciliation bill in the House to get all of this done in one shot and then move it to the Senate and get 51 senators. And that's a real heavy lift. A few years ago when President Trump then entered office in 2017, he had about 35 or so, I think it was 33 House majority amongst Republicans, and he couldn't get things through Congress. He couldn't repeal health care, as an example, even though he wanted to. So it's a really tight margin, and Democrats are going to point out all of the problems with these bills. It's stripping away Medicare savings. It's stripping away workers' rights. It's stripping away economic opportunities for Americans, and it's going to be a very uncomfortable vote.
But you see, this is where the politics gets really interesting, because one thing Ronald Reagan always realised was that if you wanted to get the things through that you'd promised the voters, you needed compromise with Congress. You needed to work with your allies in Congress. He is almost trying to do a lot of this by executive order. It might backfire. For instance, when he talks about tax cuts, which last time around cost $2 trillion.
Look, President Trump is not a politician. He was there for 4 years as president, but that's not going to change who President Trump is. Look, he is a business guy. He is very, very, he's very, very sharp when it gets to this is what I want. This is a new president, Donald J. Trump. 8 years ago when he came into the White House, we were talking, as Joel stated, what we need, how many vote majority he had. This president knows what he needs now. He knows how he's going to move forward. And there's not going to be this notion of, can I get a break on this one? He needs the votes. He's going to get out. Look what he did yesterday. He just came in with a vengeance. That's what he's going to do. That's the business side of him.
But can he get Republicans to suspend the debt ceiling? It's obviously something that's not very popular.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot of things that aren't popular that Republicans are going to have to do because America gave them the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And you don't have it for a long time if you don't do what the American people sent you to do here. So I got a feeling that, I've been in the legislature before and they corral you, right? Well, this one I believe is different because everything's on the line. Everything is on the line for America. They got a mandate. They better get it done.
I tell you what struck me last night, sitting here watching this impromptu press conference at the White House. In fact, I ran out of paper. I didn't have enough notes. There were headlines for a month in there. But it did strike me that actually from a reporter, from a White House correspondent's perspective, here you had a president dealing directly with the media, which they've not had over the last year.
Yeah, look, Donald Trump, he loves the camera. He's good at the camera. He's good at speaking. He loves to talk incessantly. I think one of the challenges that they're going to have in this administration is keeping him on message. And going to Abel's point, you know, if you're going to corral votes, and I served in the Senate as a staffer and worked closely with the House at the State Department, if you're going to corral votes, you have to be on point. You have to be clear. You have to explain why it is that every single member of your caucus has to vote against things they've said for years they would never vote against or vote for. In the case of the debt ceiling, over 30 members said they would not raise it. Well, now, why would they raise it? And so he can't extemporize. He may extemporize in front of the cameras, but behind closed doors, he has to be very clear.
Tricky territory indeed. And we heard Speaker Mike Johnson, well, he was referenced to by Donald Trump yesterday, saying he's got a tough job indeed with that conference. All right. Much more of this discussion in a moment. But for now, around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Welcome back. One of the pressing priorities for this Trump administration is getting the cabinet nominees approved. The Senate committees did hold hearings today on Elise Stefanik's nomination to the UN. Well, she's going to be the ambassador to the UN, and also for Doug Collins, who is nominated as Veteran Affairs Secretary. The Finance Committee also has approved Scott Bessent for Treasury Secretary, but it is the key security positions which remain unfilled for the moment. So the Senate leader, John Thune, said he's hoping at some point today to confirm John Ratcliffe as the CIA director. No progress yet on that particularly thorny issue of the defence nominee Pete Hegseth.
He remains controversial. They have approved Marco Rubio as a new Secretary of State. He took the oath of office, as you can see here this morning, with the Vice President, J.D. Vance. He is something of a unicorn, well-liked by Republicans and Democrats alike. Yes, that does still exist. The same cannot be said for some of the others. He does have a great deal of foreign policy experience, has to be said, of Marco Rubio. He's a staunch supporter of Israel, very hawkish on China. Here he is at his first press conference a little earlier.
President Trump was elected to keep promises, and he's going to keep those promises. And his primary promise when it comes to foreign policy is that the priority of the United States Department of State will be the United States. It will be furthering the national interest of this country. And he's given us a very clear mandate. President Trump's made it very clear, everything we do, and this is true in government, but especially at the Department of State, everything we do must be justified by the answer to one of three questions. Does it make us stronger? Does it make us safer? And does it make us more prosperous? If it doesn't do one of those three things, we will not do it.
Let's lean on Joel's State Department.
Yeah. Joel just said, I've heard that speech before.
You heard that speech before?
From other secretaries of state. Each time I've served there, it's the exact same speech. So good job for Secretary Rubio he got the talking points.
Yeah, well, if people outside didn't get it, this is the new transactional form of American foreign policy.
Well, it is. And, you know, this is going to be a real test for Marco Rubio because this is not a person known for being a transactional foreign policy thinker. Exactly. He has a deep track record in Washington of supporting, for example, foreign aid, of being tough on Russia, of being tough on Iran. He's going to be doing lots of twists and turns. He's sort of bending the knee already, I would say, to be a little cynical about it. But look, the department likes to have secretaries who know the president well and who are internationalists, and he fits that bill. He has the full support of the Senate. Former senators tend to get that blessing from their former colleagues. I think folks at the department will be happy that they may be a refuge, an island of normal in a very abnormal administration.
couldn't help but think, watching his remarks at the State Department today, that he felt like it was a natural fit for Marco Rubio to take up this role. Of course, his role in the Senate Intelligence Committee set him up for this, but he also thanked the State Department employees who are working around the world and even the local staff, which is a really important note to say that he highlighted them as well. But Abel, is he a good fit with Donald Trump on some of these policies? For example, having supported Ukraine and aid to Ukraine for years.
Look, I know Marco Rubio, Senator Rubio, very, very smart senator, understands his state, understands international issues, and I don't think President Trump would have chosen him if they weren't aligned on a lot of the issues. I mean, they are. I mean, Marco is going to do a great job. Look, I can just see him flourishing in this position because, yeah, there's going to be some challenges, but he's not going to be afraid to tell the president, this is what I believe. At the end of the day, the president is the one that has the vision. He made it very clear right there. I mean, does it make us safer? Does it make us stronger? It's pretty basic. So I have a lot of high hopes for Marco. 99-0 on the confirmation. It says it all about his colleagues where he worked. So
on my side of the pond, they will be listening very carefully to what he said on China, because, of course, there's been this rapprochement in recent weeks between the Labour government and Beijing. He is, and certainly Donald Trump, is pushing Europe into making a lose-lose choice on China, either bend to Donald Trump's will or expect the tariffs.
I can guarantee you that it's going to be what Donald Trump, where Donald Trump wants to go, where Marco Rubio is going to navigate. I mean, obviously, look, he's got some decisions to make, but he is the Secretary of State as of today. And let's give him just a little bit of time to show us what he can do.
This is going to be the issue for Sir Keir Starmer. How does he walk that fine line between these two big powers?
It's the hardest job of Secretary of State because always in every administration, the foreign minister is looked at a little skeptically by the others around the table. Oh, you're representing the foreign interests. You're hearing from foreign governments, not really supporting America. So for him to be able to translate what he's hearing overseas and why it matters to the United States, that's his crucial task.
It struck me that he said also in his remarks he wants to make sure the State Department is relevant again, indicating that he felt that it wasn't relevant. At the same time, Donald Trump, Abel, is someone who touts his relationships, his personal relationships with foreign leaders. Is there going to be a role for Marco Rubio to play in some of these really critical and difficult relationships?
Of course. I think it starts with President Trump. I mean, just look. I mean, that personal relationships, he means what he says. I think during the campaign, people say, well, he's just rhetoric. He's not going to. He means what he says. And I think the world is listening to what President Trump is saying. And I think Marco Rubio is going to be a conduit to finesse. As you stated, Joel, he's going to have to make some finessing here. But I think it's going to be a great team. And I think in the next couple of months, we're really going to see the impact of the strength that Marco Rubio has with the support of President Trump.
And if I can add, though, I think it is very valuable to have a person of stature as the Secretary of State. Remember, it's the third in line to the presidency behind the Vice President, the Speaker of the House, and then the Secretary of State. So fourth in line. He's a former senator. He ran for president. So this is a leader of stature, and I think that's very valuable because he's going to have to go it alone quite often. Donald Trump will be here handling a lot of other issues. So Rubio going into the room is going in as a person of stature, which I think is very important for American diplomacy.
Like you said, he's a unicorn. I mean, 99% approval. How many of the other nominees are going to get that sort of backing?
He's got some friends in the Senate, indeed. Yeah, made a good impression there. Well, as we said, the eyes of the world are watching what's happening here in Washington, including over in the UK. And in the UK today, Sir Keir Starmer has been responding to the enormous security failures that led to the Southport knife attack in the summer. You will remember it led to several weeks of rioting across the UK in the summer. Prevent that it is the government's excuse me a moment as we're figuring out exactly where we are here. But indeed, it was the extremist threat that was posed by the attacker Axel Rudakubana. And you see here his mugshot. They missed it, allowing him to knife and murder 3 young girls in a nursery.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this is that Keir Starmer today has denied any claims of a cover-up, insisting that he knew of this background. But he's withheld it from the public, he says, because he didn't want to deny the victims justice at trial. Nigel Farage, though, has been telling his side of the story on X, saying that he thinks the Prime Minister wasn't entirely forthcoming on this issue. And that's where it gets interesting, because some of the commentary on in the newspapers tonight refers to the government's keenness to get their point across before Elon Musk gets distracted on this side and starts tweeting as he did about the child grooming gang. So let's bring in Tom Simons, who's been watching this for us. Tom, that element is the new reality, really. You've got a government in the UK responding to an entirely domestic issue, but trying to get ahead of the story because they're concerned about how it might be portrayed from this side.
Definitely. And in fact, Keir Starmer's a former senior prosecutor in the UK back in the day, back in the 2010s. And so you would have thought would have been an ideal person to deal with, A, these awful grooming gangs, often Asian men in northern cities attacking, grooming, sexually abusing white girls, and B, this horrendous triple knife attack, 3 young girls murdered in the northwest. You'd think he'd be on top of all of that as a former prosecutor. But he did struggle with the grooming gangs, and it's because Elon Musk took the initiative away from the government, started talking about something that perhaps Keir Starmer felt he had dealt with, as he had in 2011, and that public opinion followed. And as you say, I think it is true to say that the government, Starmer, they've got off the blocks very quickly to promise a public inquiry into the Southport murders, the 3 girls, and to say that there were already lessons to be learnt. There's a body that's supposed to pick up when people might be at risk of extremism. This guy was not a terrorist. He had no political ideology, but he was extremely dangerous. And the question is, should that body have picked that up at an earlier stage and prevented those deaths?
Just more generally, Tom, obviously Sir Keir Starmer and David Lammy are trying to strengthen relations with the Trump administration, but there is, most notably, and we saw it yesterday in the Oval Office, a political vibe shift here in so many different areas, on green targets, on new rules, on diversity and inclusion, on protection for civil servants, but also on the cultural issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think from London, they're probably looking across at all the razzle-dazzle in the US and saying to themselves, we're OK so far. Great Britain has not been mentioned. The United Kingdom has not been mentioned by Donald Trump. The tariffs, well, that's so far Mexico and Canada. So I think they'll probably be quite confident at this stage. But as you say, it's an enormous challenge. I was quite struck with an article that Lord Mandelson, who's Britain's pick to be the chief diplomat in Washington, wrote on Fox News, of course, very carefully worded. He picked up all the major points. He called Trump's victory a comprehensive victory. He called him a great campaigner. He said he was straight-talking, deal-making instincts. He said the US was right to ask NATO for more money, and he said that we were old partners offering new ways of working. So check, 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 or tick, 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 as we would say in the UK. Every single one of those points hit on the nail. And I can say, having heard a speech from the Foreign Secretary David Lammy recently, he is saying very similar things.
All right. Thank you so much. Really interesting to get that perspective. And Joel, I know she was scribbling furiously as we were watching that there. I'm curious, from your post here in Washington, how do you see the reaction that is happening there in the UK?
I mean, it's quite distressing, quite frankly, as a person who's worked in American foreign policy for a number of years, for decades, to see countries afraid of the United States in such a visceral way, to see foreign ministers basically using Trump talking points to gain favor from him to protect their countries. That's not how states are supposed to work with each other. That's not how countries are supposed to work with each other, to work together as equals and deal with hard issues as equals rather than the fear of a close ally. Look, Donald Trump is already trying to rhetorically attack our allies, Panama, Sweden, Canada. Who next? I find it very distressing. I'm not sure what the goal is. And I think that when you add to that the social media platforms who are echoing his rhetoric, all the big shots sitting there, the plutocrats at the inauguration, sitting in front of his cabinet choices, more important than his own cabinet, that is a very distressing signal to send to the world.
I am the advance envoy for the special relationship. Okay.
There was a reason you were
and
here.
I got here before Lord Mandelson. But there was some reporting this weekend that maybe his papers would be rejected by Donald Trump. They're really irritated that Labour sent people over here to campaign for Kamala Harris. Can you really imagine that they would say no?
I think as we move forward, President Trump is going to look at it on a broad stroke. But this notion that, they're catering to President Trump, I don't look at it that way. They know President Donald Trump. They've worked with him for 4 years. He was a president before. So this isn't new. A new president.
But Elon Musk's influence, perhaps, is something new.
Of course. And, with
reform in the wings.
Yeah, I saw all those folks that were sitting there, and people this morning are all up in arms that you had Meta and you had Elon Musk. The last election, they were with Joe Biden. So, I mean, it's like they're not dumb people here. They know exactly what they want. So now they're currying favor. They're trying to get in with, I don't know about influence. They want to make sure they're at the table. They want to make sure that their voice is heard. I can guarantee you this. President Trump will hear everybody's voices, and he's going to make his own decision. His own decision.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be one to watch, isn't it? And of course, when Nigel Farage is tweeting, he does look this way for support from some within the Republican movement. We'll see how that debate evolves over the next 24, 48 hours. We're going to take a short break. Do stay with us. Plenty more to come on the programme. You're watching BBC News. Hello, I'm Christian Fraser here with Sumi Somaskanda, and this is The Context live from Washington, focusing on the first full day of Donald Trump's time in office. The president has promised to stamp down on illegal migration, declaring a national emergency at the US-Mexico border and seeking to revoke birthright citizenship. Immigrant rights advocates have called the order unconstitutional.
Welcome back. There is no question that the biggest story of day one really was the sweeping order of clemency that President Trump gave to nearly every person convicted of crimes, including serious violence in the January 6th insurrection. It includes full, complete, and unconditional pardons for 1,500 people charged, including those who were convicted of assaulting police officers and carrying firearms into the Capitol. It went far beyond what even the vice president had imagined only a few days earlier.
Yeah, in fact, the quote was, if you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. J.D. Vance just a week ago. The numbers here are pretty astonishing. The full, complete and unconditional pardon extends to 1,500 people charged, 1,200 convicted, around 300 who are in jail now, and 160 of them for violent crime. That includes Enrique Tarrio, the former leader of the far-right Proud Boys. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison for seditious conspiracy, and also the founders of the Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes among them, who was jailed for 18 years. You'll remember his face. Our reporter Reagan Morris is with us live from one of the detention facilities here in DC. Oh, it looks cold there. Rather you than me, Reagan. But tell me who is still in there. What are you waiting for?
Well, we're waiting for about 20 other people. We just had someone come out, but it wasn't the fanfare we'd been expecting. I was here late last night. We were sort of expecting people to come out and everyone cheer and hug and welcome them back to the fold. But instead, I found a woman named Rachel Powell who was brought out a side door and just walked over. I just noticed her talking to some of the people here. And she was released out the side and no one seemed to notice. And we spoke to her. She says other people in there are being processed, but nobody really quite knows what's going on. Late last night, the two brothers, the Valentine brothers, were released. We didn't see them go out. They left out a side door, and a person from the White House came, and he was accompanied by an engineer from X, from what formerly known as Twitter. So they gave us a very surreal, strange pre-midnight press briefing with no microphones that we could barely hear them and didn't quite know who they were, and it's all been a bit strange.
Yeah, I was listening just the other day to a podcast that the New York Times did with an American of Vietnamese descent who they were speaking to in Canada. He had left America. He realised that he was going to be put in jail. He'd already been convicted. He was supposed to report to court. But instead of doing that, he did a runner across the border and was waiting for this order. So one would presume, Regan, that there are people up and down the country who are in the process who have just been given the most enormous bit of good news.
Well, it's good news and bad news, because the people that have been pardoned have mostly been released, the people who were convicted. The people in this jail in DC, this is sort of a holding facility. So the ones that were pardoned late last night had been convicted, so they could be pardoned. The ones that haven't yet faced trial, they're kind of in a gray area, because they can't be pardoned because they're not convicted yet. So their lawyers, they're filing paperwork and going through the system, but it's slightly a bureaucratic mess.
Regan, well done, avoiding the cold and also the people running into you. Thank you very much indeed for that brave effort. Abel, look, these are the same senators, the Republican senators who were running, cowering from the mob. Just to read you John Thune, the Senate leader's response today. I don't have any comments. I haven't seen all the stuff that he signed yesterday. So here we are again, 4 years on. We're back to Republicans on the Hill trying to second-guess controversial Trump announcements.
Yeah, I don't understand that. I mean, look, President Trump campaigned on this issue. I mean, everybody knew. He made it very clear to people that he was going to pardon the J6ers. I was on the campaign trail. I spent, 8-9 weeks on the campaign trail? He was saying, and people would ask me, and I would say, that's President Trump's message. Now, me personally, I have some issues with the ones that were tied in with police officers. I mean, but I listened to what he said during the campaign, and I asked myself, as someone who's not in Washington, why wasn't there protection that day? Who runs the Capitol Police?
But that aside, it's the issue. This is not normal, is it? For Joe Biden to be pardoning his family and loads of people on the Hill who are part of the January 6th committee, and for Donald Trump to be pardoning 1,500 people. This is not normal stuff. Do you not see the hypocrisy, though, of him criticising Joe Biden yesterday for these sweeping pardons and then pardoning 1,500 people, some of them committing serious crimes?
Christian, I don't see it as hypocrisy. I look at, Joe Biden actually gave him a pass. Why would he do that? I mean, it allowed President Trump to say, look, while I was giving my speech
good point.
To the world.
Not the same. Different universes.
It's the same.
Different universes.
It's a pardon.
It was a jailbreak. These individuals committed violent acts against police officers, beating them, bludgeoning them, using baseball bats. Several died. Some of them are the heads of white supremacist, anti-Semitic gangs that have now been released publicly, freed up. This is deeply unpopular. I would love to hear the conversations right now amongst the Capitol Police, who every day have to protect Republican members of Congress who don't have the guts to stand up and say, those guys beat up me and my colleagues, and you're saying nothing. This is a travesty of justice.
And indeed, one of those officers I saw wrote on X yesterday, I just spent 14 hours making sure this inauguration went down safely and that Donald Trump was protected. Thank you, America, for this.
This is not a party that believes in law and order if it can't speak up for the police.
That was a horrible day for America. There's no doubt. In my mind, in my heart, I feel that the security was inadequate. Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House, and when you're the Speaker of the House, it's your job to protect the U.S. Capitol. It didn't have enough. They knew the speech was coming.
I have to push back gently, Abel. They were overrun, and the President of the United States, Donald Trump, chose for hours to not send in any reinforcements, any guard. He had the responsibility ultimately for that. The police were overrun. Nobody blames Nancy Pelosi for that.
Look at Seattle and Minneapolis, Joel.
Different
Same thing.
Different.
They didn't go to jail. They didn't prosecute
that is, we're talking about the insurrection of the Capitol. We're talking about the first day this president decides to release hardened criminals who beat up Capitol Police officers.
And Abel, it's deeply unpopular, as Joel said. If you look at the
there's no secret. It is not popular.
Not an acceptance of pardoning the J6.
It's not popular. We all know that it's not popular. However, he made a commitment. He made a promise to the American people during the campaign that he was going to do this, and he did it. He followed through.
Even J.D. Vance thought that the violent ones would not be let out.
Can I just interject, because I want to get your thoughts on some breaking news that we're getting. CBS, our sister channel, has here in the United States, they've got an affidavit from Danielle Hegseth. She's the former sister-in-law of the Defense Secretary nominee Pete Hegseth. We were talking about the nominations earlier. It's been provided to the Senate Armed Services Committee following a request from Ranking Member Senator Jack Reed, and the affidavit alleges that Pete Hegseth was abusive towards his second ex-wife, Samantha, and that she feared for her safety. Now, he got out of the Armed Services Committee yesterday. It's due to go to the floor, but Senator Thune was asked about this today, and he had no answer as to when he would put it to the full vote. Does that complicate things for Pete Hegseth?
I mean, it doesn't help, obviously, but look, Pete has been going through all these anonymous slanders now for what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks, and he is the nominee for President Trump. And the question that you have to ask yourself is Pete Hegseth fit to serve in that position?
Is he?
I believe he's fit to serve. I mean, we don't have any. I mean, now this letter comes out at the last minute. Let's look at the letter. I haven't read the letter. I haven't seen the letter.
To go to the full vote.
Right. But in the same token, look, Pete is, what do they call it? Dust on the boots. He was on the front lines. I can go on and on and on. Is he fit to serve? I believe that he is. Obviously, President Donald J. Trump believes that he's fit to serve. Now, he got out of the Senate. It's going before the House. It is his nominee. And I believe he's going to be the next Secretary of...
We should just say this letter is not alone. Of course, there were the other allegations of sexual assault as well.
Of course, but they're all anonymous. This one's not anonymous,
I think that the American people...
It's from his family.
I think that the American people need to ask very serious questions about whether we are served as having a Secretary of Defense with a drinking problem who is now being credibly accused of abuse of women.
But Joel, he said
he bankrupted.
He's not drinking.
He bankrupted. In a year, in 9 months, a conversion. He bankrupted it's not credible. And he bankrupted 2 nonprofits. He's 44 years old. He's never led a major military organization. He's deeply unqualified for this job. He should not be overseeing the American nuclear arsenal.
I mean, look at the current one, the current gentleman who's there. Look what happened in Afghanistan. Why is he qualified?
A retired 4-star general.
That's perhaps a longer conversation that we should have.
This is the context.
Thank you for welcoming me to the context. I feel like I'm in between crossfire here. This is great.
Let's take a short break. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
Say that. That doesn't mean it's true.
Welcome back. Dealing with the millions of undocumented migrants that cross the southern border is, of course, Donald Trump's #1 priority. And last night, the Senate lent crucial support to that plan, passing with Democrat votes the Lake and Riley Act. That is a bill that will force law enforcement to hold undocumented migrants who are accused of crimes. Hands President Trump an early win on his signature issue. Not where the Democratic leadership might necessarily want to be, though. There are Democrats, especially in the key swing states, who believe that is why they lost in 2024.
Yeah, the question is how Democrats respond more broadly to that agenda. 18 states today filed a lawsuit against his executive order to end birthright citizenship, claiming it violates the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. There will be other legal challenges. Yesterday, local law enforcement in Chicago said they would not be joining federal immigration officials on a targeted roundup of illegal migrants. We have our correspondents on the story today. Carl Nassman is in Chicago for us. Will Grant is on the border in San Diego. Great to see you both. And Carl, I want to start with you because you have been following there in Chicago, which also looks freezing cold there, Carl. You've been following how the city is preparing for the mass deportation operation that the Trump administration, that Donald Trump himself had announced. What have you been finding?
Yeah, this is a city that's on edge, Sumi, not only because of those rumors that we're hearing that this could be, as Tom Homan himself, Trump's border czar, has said, that this could be ground zero for these initial deportations that Donald Trump has been promising, but also because this is a city and this is, in fact, a neighborhood that has gone through this before. Back during Donald Trump's first administration, we saw those ICE officials, federal enforcement officials, coming into this neighborhood and sometimes even going door to door, business to business, asking for credentials, documentation, and then taking anybody that was undocumented and deporting them, essentially. So this neighborhood knows what that is like, and we've seen local officials, politicians, community groups starting to help prepare people again for what might happen. In fact, Sumi, take a look over here. This is actually a sign on this telephone pole right next to us. You can see it says in Spanish, "Conozca sus derechos," which means know your rights. You can see a Spanish language campaign here in the heart of really the Mexican area of Chicago, telling people what they should be doing, what they need to know if there is some sort of immigration enforcement action that takes place here. Once again, you can see around me, obviously it's cold, so very few people out anyway, but you get the sense here that the streets are empty, the streets are quiet because, a lot of people kind of hanging back, maybe not going to work today, not going to school, not going out for their shopping, because there's a sense that they don't really want to be out on the streets if indeed we see one of those immigration enforcement operations taking place here in Chicago.
Yeah, Carl, we've heard that from a number of other cities across the U.S. as well. And I want to go to Will in San Diego. Will, we know that one of the executive orders signed by Donald Trump is to declare a national emergency along the border with Mexico. What impact will that have there on the border?
Well, at this stage, it's still a little difficult to say. I mean, obviously, the very first steps that will allow the Trump administration to do is access federal funds and, in essence, deploy the military to this border if they choose to do so. Now, we can't say we've sort of seen troop build-ups or anything like that taking place. It's just not that sort of situation yet. But I think what it does is reach two key audiences. One, of course, is Donald Trump's supporters here in San Diego, who simply wanted to hear him say that the very first moment that he took office, which is what he did. It was right front and centre in his inaugural speech. But the other audience he's speaking to is just over the border behind me in Mexico. Those undocumented immigrants who are making their way to that border to try to cross it, whether through legal pathways or otherwise, to make it clear to them that he is engaging in a very different approach to the outgoing administration, the previous administration, that he plans a complete root and branch reform, really, of the way that the United States views the people who are trying to come into this country and those who can stay. So I think it's already showing signs that there are people who are either going to turn away or have had their hopes dashed at the final moment. They had, as you have heard of, CBP1 application dates. That was the legal pathway the Biden administration had created in order for people to put their case for asylum to the US authorities. Those who had those either on the day that Donald Trump took office or today have been now told that those appointments are cancelled.
Yeah, interesting that the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, said today that there was a need for cool heads. It shows that there is pressure on the Mexican government at the moment. Will, thank you very much for that. In reference to the legal complaint that's been filed in federal district court, it started in Massachusetts. It's been joined by the cities of San Francisco, Washington, D.C., among others. So let's speak then to State Senator Winnie Brink. She's the Democratic Majority Leader of the Michigan Senate. Senator, good to have you on the programme. There's no doubt that immigration was one of, if not the key reason why Democrats lost in November. Where do Democrats draw the line when it comes to these reforms? Because surely there is a political risk in opposing everything.
Certainly. And I think that we have clearly seen that there are issues at the national borders that need attention. And we are certainly hopeful that our Congress and our leaders in Washington, D.C. will come together in a bipartisan way and address those in a productive way. We saw progress on it before. It was stopped by Trump. So I am not certain that he is the best to lead on this. And certainly vilifying whole groups of people who have come to this country in search of a better life is not the answer.
What will you do to push back, though? Because obviously in California, Gavin Newsom's pulled together around $50 million for the legal bills that they will undoubtedly incur fighting some of these directives from Donald Trump. Have you put together a war chest in the same way?
I wouldn't say that we'd put together a chest in the same way that Gavin Newsom has. We are situated differently here in the state of Michigan. I do know that our Attorney General has indicated that we are party to this legal action protesting the executive order that President Trump has put in place. So we will use all of the tools at our disposal to ensure that people are treated with fairness and in accordance with the law.
What happens when the federal government looks to Massachusetts in the same way that they've looked at Chicago? Will local law officials work with federal immigration and customs enforcement to round people up?
I think that remains to be seen. Of course, those are decisions made at the local level as police departments answer to their local city authorities. However, I know many police officers understand that vilifying immigrants in their communities is not helpful. Tearing apart families can be very destructive and cause multiple other problems. They are not helpful. These enforcement measures that are gratuitously applied are not helpful to keeping peace and safety in neighborhoods. So I am very hopeful that cooler heads will prevail when it comes to the implementation of any of these things.
You're a very green state. I just want to finally ask you about some of his policies on green. He's cancelled new leases for offshore wind. He's withdrawn America from the Paris Climate Agreement. He's unpicking most of Biden's agenda on EVs. How does that affect your state?
Yeah, we worked incredibly hard at the state level to pass really cutting-edge climate policy that puts us at the forefront of good policy that will help us create a more sustainable economy and environment for ourselves and for future generations. So this is very concerning to us to see that he is taking away some of those tools and some of the things that we know we need to do in order to build on the progress. We understand his desire to do what he has really formed his talking points around, understanding the harm that can do, both in terms of the environment, but in terms of human health and well-being is going to be incredibly important. I think it will also be very difficult to stop the movement toward a cleaner climate and cleaner energy policy and all of the innovations that have been evolving in that field. We know that we need to keep heading in that direction, and we will continue at the state level to do everything we can with policy that we can control.
Senator Winnie Brinks, good to have you on the programme tonight. Thank you very much for your time. It's interesting that, because I remember the first time around we had a delegation of governors who came to London on their way to Germany who were going their own way on climate change, even though Donald Trump was rolling it back.
And they've been doing that on the city level, just as we're seeing on immigration as well, that they're trying to make their own decisions. But let's talk about the immigration executive orders that we saw. Abel, I've spoken to Republican members of Congress who are also a bit concerned about the extent of the mass deportation orders. Will it then catch up people who didn't commit a crime, who perhaps have been living here for years, who have had children, who are paying taxes? Is that something you see could be a problem in California as well?
First of all, inflation was a big issue during the campaign. But let me share with you, immigration was the most important issue in this campaign. There was three issues: immigration, immigration, and immigration. And people want it fixed. And this notion of allowing trendy arena and MS-13 and having an open border policy, coming across the border, sitting down on the ground, bringing you in, giving you a court date and releasing you, not knowing who you are, needed to stop, and it stopped yesterday. Today is a new day. What did Marco Rubio say earlier today, Secretary of State? Are we safer? That's his first policy. That's why immigration is very, very important here.
I guess just to follow up on that,
Please.
though, there hasn't been that much discord among Democrats as well on this policy of deporting criminals. It is a question of the rest of the people who get caught up in it.
Well, Tom Homan came out this morning and he said the most important priority for him today is to seal the border, number one. Number two, and deport criminal illegal aliens. And if you happen to be next to a criminal illegal alien and you're not documented, you're going to be deported as well. So it is the big issue. It has to be fixed. We are not safer because of that border. It has to be fixed.
What do you think of that, Joel? We're just seeing some news coming in as well that the Trump administration is going to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. That at the Department of Homeland Security. You see it as important?
Look, I agree with Abel that immigration was the dominant issue in the campaign. I also would argue that there was a bipartisan solution to dealing with it over the past year that the president decided he didn't want to move forward for political purposes. And so call me a skeptic as a Democrat. I don't believe that this president is looking for solutions that get support from both sides of the aisle that are truly comprehensive. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that there are funds put to immigration courts. I hope that there is a comprehensive plan for how to deal with people here who are here, who were born here, to parents who were undocumented, the dreamers. I don't see that yet, but there are really complex issues. Look, for example, this question, Homan, he would not answer about whether or not American citizens should be deported if they are in families where they are undocumented. And I think that's very risky behavior.
Christian, Holman worked for Barack Obama. Nobody deported more Hispanics than Barack Obama in America. So, it was safer. Today, we need to enforce our immigration laws.
There was no family separation policy like this.
President Trump made it very clear. He supports legal immigration. But illegal immigration, we need to stop it and deport the folks that are here.
Well, just very quickly, though, coming full circle to the transactional foreign policy we were talking about before. Mexican president's talking about cool heads. She's being threatened with 25% tariffs. Last night, he said he would send the special forces into Mexico to deal with the cartels.
Calling cartels foreign terrorist organizations, sending active duty military to the border. This is not a pacifist kind of policy towards Mexico to work in partnership diplomatically. The Remain in Mexico policy as well. These are very aggressive policies. Perhaps they're negotiating gambits. We'll see. But the tariffs, he said, Joel, February 1st.
They are terrorists,
and we'll see.
Joel. Cartels are terrorists.
Does that mean that the United States should be bombing Mexico?
We could do this
Not
for another
Mexico,
hour. But we're running out of time. We're right up against the break. Abel, lovely to see you in person. Joel, thank you very much again.
Always.
Nice to be alongside you, Sumi.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to be here with another panel for the next hour, so I hope you'll stay with me for that. Plenty more news to come, including another Donald Trump press conference. Do stay with us.